How's it going, everyone? I'm Ken from Pixelated Thoughts, and in this video I'm going to be talking about Extermination for the PS2. This was released in 2001 and is the first survival horror title on the platform. Set in an Antarctic research facility, you play as Dennis, a recon marine who, alongside his unit, are responding to a distress call. After infiltrating the base through a ventilation shaft, he and his teammate Roger discover that the base has fallen into disarray and is infested with bugs, or as they're known outside of the US, Hydras. Roger sends Dennis out to restore power, and upon his return, he finds that Roger is overwhelmed by the Hydras, and honestly, it's kind of embarrassing because he misses every single shot with that light machine gun. The Hydras then infect Roger, and he quickly mutates and then is shot down by a mysterious woman. Dennis is thrown a magazine and an MTS vaccine, which will completely remove any signs of infection and will heal you completely. Left with no other options, Dennis pursues the woman in search of answers and to hopefully reconnect with the surviving members of his team. The opening section of Extermination is probably the game that's most interesting, gameplay and narrative-wise. For the time, this was a pretty impressive technical showcase for the PlayStation 2. While other survival horror titles featured tank controls that could feel unruly or clunky, here in Extermination, you were very agile. Dennis is fast even in a weakened state. He can mantle crates and boxes, leap far distances, dodge enemy attacks, and even cross areas by grabbing the bars or fencing above him. Aiming was done in both third and first person, and even though aiming used inverted controls, I don't think I played a game at the time that allowed the player the option to do both. The downside was that you were stationary and enemies in this game are very aggressive and fast. To counteract this, aiming in third person immediately locks onto an enemy, allowing you to quickly identify a target and begin defending yourself. Your primary weapon in Extermination is known as the SPR-4, and this weapon is fully customizable. You can attach a shotgun, grenade launcher, flamethrower, and a missile launcher as a secondary. And if the area happened to be too dark, you could utilize the original grip because it came with a flashlight. I believe the inclusion of a fully customizable primary in a survival horror title was a pretty cool feature. I really think that Extermination had a real shot at being a very good survival horror game. This could have honestly been a franchise, but it had a number of real issues. For one, even though you explore fully 3D environments, the only way to control the camera is by centering with the left thumbstick or by aiming. Why the right thumbstick is not used, I have no clue, and it is frustrating because once you enter a new area or encounter a new threat, you'll have to whip that camera around quickly, otherwise you're going to be overwhelmed. The bugs themselves are easy to manage. Their threat overall is minimal, but everything else beyond that, mutated humans, gunners, dogs, and other stronger variations of infected, are a nightmare. The camera will get obscured by obstacles, and when you're trying to put yourself in a safe position to fight back, you might find yourself pinned in a corner, and you might also find yourself taking unnecessary damage as enemies will quickly rotate and rush to your position. This pain is also felt in navigation, as there are a number of hidden areas found throughout the game that require careful camera positioning, otherwise you might find yourself losing out on valuable secondary ammunition or healing items. Not being able to fully control the camera was a weird decision and does greatly impact your enjoyment of the game. You have a right thumbstick and it does nothing. Another issue is how spongy enemies are. Now I know what you're thinking. This is a survival horror title and ammo is going to be scarce. You're actually right and wrong. In Extermination, there are consoles that will reload your primary weapon to max. There are a number of magazines that you can acquire throughout their time in the game, which will increase your maximum ammo count. Secondary ammunition is scarce and is the most effective against enemies in this game. That's not the actual issue, though. The issue lies in the fact that to be effective against enemies in this game, you have to hit their weak point, and this is indicated by a large glowing orb. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself that there's an auto-aim feature. You'll just snap to that weak point and easily destroy the enemy. You would be wrong. Auto-aim snaps to the body of the enemy and not the weak point. You actually have to manually aim in first person, and if you haven't played a game from the 2000s, it's not exactly a smooth experience. I also mentioned how quick and aggressive enemies can be, so by the time you've actually lined them up in first person, they're more than likely in your face and knocking you out of position. If you just happen to fire at an enemy's body, you can go through multiple magazines or they die. There was a hit registration issue where consecutive shots would not register damage. This is obviously problematic when you're sighting down in a weak spot and only 1 of every 3 shots does weak point damage. I don't know why that is, but I've seen it multiple times throughout my runs. It's a pain in the ass, and honestly, you should just absolutely run to conserve ammo. You're going to need it when you eventually run into the different bosses. And those bosses that make up Extermination, by the way, they kind of suck. The first major boss you fight places you in a small arena, and you have to shoot its weak spot while dodging its tentacle. The easiest way to beat this boss, honestly, is with the shotgun. It's around 7 to 10 rounds, and it just melts it. If you don't use the shotgun, and you also don't want to use the grenade launcher, which you'll require during this fight, because you should conserve ammunition, you can just run from side to side and hit the weak point with your rifle. This fight, however, takes so much longer to complete if you do so. There is no point in shooting anywhere else but the weak point, because doing so will just lead to frustration. Now the next fight is the infected Roger fight. That takes place near the end of the game, and this is a really simple one if you have grenade launcher ammo. You just need to stay in one spot and move from time to time when he shoots missiles and just pepper him with grenades. But you have to remind yourself not to fire those grenades until he recovers from his downed animation. Otherwise, you're just wasting ammo. You could also be a psychopath and jump into the arena to shoot at him just to give yourself a little more excitement, but it's actually just safer to just hit him with grenades until he dies. The final fight of this game is an absolute slog. It's best to man the 50 cal and just shoot at this boss in its first phase until it falls, and then when you hit the second phase, use your missile launcher once to stun the boss and then head back to the 50 cal to do damage. Eventually, the boss will fall again, and you will fight a weird variation of yourself, and you just fire all your ammunition until it dies. The running theme is that every boss found in this game is a bullet sponge. I think Roger took 15 to 20 grenades, and the final boss, Origin, took almost every special ammo I had in missiles and grenades before it fell. The 50 cal footage I was showing for its first phase is actually 3 to 4 minutes of me doing the same thing until I got to the second phase. It's just not fun. Don't get me wrong, most bosses in survival horror titles are not fun to fight at all, but for some reason, this fight really annoyed me because of all the hit registration issues. Even with certain innovations in gameplay that were really fresh for the genre, Extermination held itself back. This could have been a really good survival horror or action horror title, but maybe the use of a controllable camera would have made killing enemies too easy. Whatever the case is, spongy enemies and a poorly implemented camera system really bring down the enjoyment of this game. Now, as it pertains to the narrative, there is absolutely nothing remarkable or stand out about Extermination. It's clear that this game was influenced by John Carpenter's The Thing, but it has none of the tension or the intrigue. Dennis is a very boring main character, and while the game tries to hint at depth through different conversations and actions, he is ultimately forgettable, and that extends to everybody. Roger is only around for a few minutes, and in his short time, he is obviously the generic military mentor. When he's brought back from one of the boss fights as the infected, the lines delivered by Dennis are laughably bad and honestly made me root for the monster.
Roger, over here! You told me to be strong. I believed in those words, but what matters most is that I believed in you. What I want to know is how come a tough guy like you let some bacteria eat him for lunch? Was that all a lie? Answer me, Roger.
Why is he acting like Roger knows what he's saying? And also, why are you insulting him right now? Yes, he got killed by bugs in a very embarrassing manner, but there's no reason to monologue with an infected. We're well past that point. You don't have to get to that reason right there. That was just one of the dumbest things I've seen. And in Extermination, it doesn't matter the character. It feels like the writing constantly tiptoes towards something, but then immediately retreats back to a safe space. The entire game feels like it's going to lead to something between Dennis and Cindy, who happens to be the mysterious woman in the beginning of the game. Cindy is Dennis's ex-girlfriend. Their interactions come off as tense or frustrated. I really can't tell because the voice acting is bad, but as soon as you reach the end and you expect some emotional dialogue that will result in some type of resolution. None of that occurs. Dennis awkwardly states that they're friends and then rides off into the sunset. It's just absurd. Even when you're learning about the origins of the infection, it's unremarkable. The base is infected due to a bacterium, and the government, who knew about this bacteria and its dangers, has been keeping this information under wraps for years while experimenting on its capabilities. They then decide that they would use Special Forces Marines to test out its potential in combat, because of course the government would self-sabotage itself because they're evil. The project itself is known as Extermination, and apparently your team leader, Major Madigan, knew about this but was given a secondary objective to destroy the facility to ensure that it cannot leave Antarctica. You're given more information about the bacteria via notes that get left around. You also meet a journalist who somehow infiltrated the base unnoticed, but the last time you meet him, he says he has all he needs and just dips. How he survived the ordeal, I'll never know, but they never bring it back up. I don't even know how he escaped given the amount of infection. It's just one big awful thing. And that's one of the bigger issues with Extermination's writing. Everything is surface level. Any attempt at an emotional moment is thwarted because the writers never go far enough. There's a character in Sonia who seems to know more than she lets on, seems to really care for Cindy, wants to repair the fractured relationship between Cindy and Dennis, but ultimately dies randomly in a hallway. And not just any hallway. It is the hallway outside of the room that they were occupying. She died in such a gruesome fashion that there is no way that Cindy nor anyone else could not notice. It's an insane moment because when Dennis finds her body, he's like, best not to tell Cindy for now, and just moves on. They never bring it up again. That's just how this game works. When you see something that is in front of you, that is what you get, and then afterwards, you just move on. Doesn't matter if it's Roger's death, Major Madigan's death, Sonia's death, or anything else. It's there, and it's gone. Maybe the devs didn't think that people would be interested in the melodrama, and I totally get that, but if you put that there and you have it come up front and center, the absence of depth in any of these scenarios is very noticeable. Overall, Extermination just hasn't aged well and isn't exactly a game that I would recommend playing if you're looking to tap into the PS2's vast library. While the gameplay mechanics were impressive at the time, the execution is lacking, whether it's the clunky camera system or the weak point system that felt too rigid. Now, there is one other thing that I had a problem with that I forgot to mention, but to me it was kind of minor, and that was the fact that Extermination does like to hold your hand a lot. Now, if you are a fan of the survival horror genre, you will know that the environments act as one big puzzle piece, and a number of survival horror titles have a ton of puzzles for you to figure out. That is largely absent here. Basically, what happens when you're going through an environment for the first time, Dennis will monologue, and then he'll tell you where you need to go. He'll actually bring up how to get there because the camera will pan over and shift, and that happens constantly. So if you're expecting a title that isn't going to hold your hand and allow you the freedom to kind of explore and do certain things, that is not the case. Now, while there's optional stuff for you to look for, when it comes to the main story, Dennis will tell you where you need to go and you will never get lost. So just keep that in mind. I really do believe, though, that if Extermination had nailed the gameplay down, nobody would care about the narrative. And the reason why I say that is because outside of the Silent Hill series, most narratives in survival horror were shallow, and Extermination is no different. But if you fail to execute in either area, you end up creating a problem that no one wants. And outside of Extermination, I think Deep Space, the developer behind this game, only released one other title that was exclusive to Japan, and that was called Hungry Ghost. That's rough, man. But if you do want to try out the first survival horror title on the platform, then do so. Just know that there are some pain points that may cause you frustration. But let me know what you think in the comments, because that's going to do it for this video. If you happen to like the content, please consider sharing, and subscribing. I'm Ken from Pixelated Thoughts, and I'll talk to you next time.